Hello, I am Karen Bessie, and I am the Director of Continuing Medical Provider and Nursing Education. What I would like to do today is review the new guidelines for regularly scheduled series and what is required for activity coordinators. Let me share my screen here. Norton Healthcare, we accredit over 50 activities, regularly scheduled series, plus approximately 30 to 40 live activities and over 200 enduring activities. So based on that, we have outlined processes to work with our regularly scheduled series activity coordinators to help confirm that we are meeting all the accreditation guidelines. Essentially, the activity coordinators are an extension of our CME team to make sure we maintain these guidelines. What I'm going to do now is just to go through who our team is, review some of the key CME requirements, the attendance process, the resources that are available for your providers, and our next steps for RSS coordinators. This is the CME team, of which a lot of these individuals you'll recognize. We have Emily Garrison, Sandra Stroud, McKenna Byerly, Mary McDonald, and Sally Sturgeon. These are the guidelines and the criteria that are critical in maintaining our certification as a CME provider. And these individual ones that I highlighted here is the criteria and guidelines that are affected with the RSS activities. So I just wanted to highlight those. And as I had mentioned earlier, it is really critical that the RSS activity coordinators are familiar with some of these key guidelines and that they are an extension of our team for the coordination of the RSS activities that they coordinate. One of the things that you've heard a lot about is the disclosure. So just to clarify, the key purpose of the disclosure is to determine if the individual that can affect the content of the CME activity has a relationship with an ineligible company. And I will define the ineligible company here in a second. Individuals who are required to complete a disclosure form, as I had mentioned, is anyone that can affect the content and influence it. So that would be the activity planners, the moderators, facilitators, the speakers, an individual that selects the cases, and in some cases, the content reviewer. There are a few examples where a disclosure is not required, and I will review those. Essentially, an ineligible company is any company that produces a product that is sold or used on patients. So essentially, a lot of the ineligible companies are the pharmaceutical companies, the device manufacturers, any labs that also sell products. This is a partial list of ineligible companies. So for those, again, it's any company that produces or sells a product that's used on patients. And all of these relationships need to be disclosed on the disclosure form. For eligible companies, these are companies that can receive accreditation, and these do not need to be disclosed. So an example would be Norton Healthcare, Norton Medical Group, any physician practice, or any of the professional associations a provider may be a member of, or Epic or the electronic health record company. Again, any company that does provide actual services to patients. What is new? In the last few years, ACCME has updated some of the guidelines, and a few of them are relevant for disclosure forms. An individual has to complete any relationship that they have had in the last 2 years. A type of relationship would be if they were a speaker, received an honorarium, or a consultant, or on the advisory board. Those are examples of the types of relationships, and those are outlined on the disclosure form. But individuals need to identify any relationship for 2 years. Historically, it has been 1 year, and now it is 2 years. They also need to indicate if a relationship with the company, even if that relationship has ended in the last 2 years, in that 2-year reporting period. Previously, if the relationship had ended, they did not need to report it. They only need to report relationships for themselves. They no longer need to report any relevant relationships for their partners or significant others or spouses. It is just for themselves. They need to identify relationships with all ineligible companies, regardless of what the topic is. And another thing too is in the definition of ineligible companies, you may be familiar with the term a commercial entity. They have replaced the term ineligible companies for commercial entities. So it's essentially the same thing. But all relationships with ineligible companies, again, regardless of the topic. A new criteria is they need to identify funds, even if they go to their employer or another organization. For example, if they are doing research and receiving research grants, but that fund, those grants are not going to them individually and say maybe going to Norton Healthcare, those funds need to also be disclosed, or the relationship needs to be disclosed. There are some examples where you do not need to have disclosures, and I wanted to highlight those, and some specific examples where disclosure is required. So for example, if the activity is discussing anything related to clinical treatment, new guidelines, management, recommendations, then a disclosure form is required. If the activity is only discussing current patient cases for the purpose of planning patient treatment and care, and again, it's for patients that are current and it's going to affect their treatment of care, then you do not need a disclosure form. This disclosure form is only required for the planners and facilitators, but not for all the speakers or individuals that attend. If the cases presented are historical patient cases, then a disclosure form is needed. So to recap, the only time a disclosure form is not needed in the discussion of patient care is if it is for a current patient and it's going to affect the patient care and they're making patient care recommendations. If the topic is non-clinical, such as an administrative topic, business, a wellness, or legislative type topics and education for providers, then a disclosure form is not needed. And in this instance, it is not needed for the planners or of the activity. We have created a new process to help streamline the obtaining of this information and the reporting. And in identifying this process, we did talk to some other large programs to see what they were doing. And we kind of mirrored some of those processes for Norton Healthcare. One of the things we are now asking RSS coordinators to do is to review the disclosure form. So we would like you to review this key question of if there is a relevant relationship. If the individual answers yes, we would like for you to contact our office or the coordinator before the activity. After you review the form, we'd like you to complete this area, which is just asking if there was a relevant relationship. You answer yes or no, and then you indicate your name on who it was reviewed by. And if there is a relevant relationship, this will need to be mitigated and resolved prior to the activity. And the CME team will do that. And typically the mitigation is that the presentation is reviewed prior to the event. After you review the form, we would like you to complete a grid. And essentially the purpose of this grid is to summarize the disclosure forms. So you would just indicate their information, how are they involved in your activity, are they a planner or a speaker, if they did have a relevant relationship, and if they do have a relevant relationship, we would like you to put the name of the company and the nature of the relationship. Initially, we'd like to receive these on a quarterly basis. You only need to create a grid, one per year. We do not need a grid per activity. We do ask that you keep the format that we have, and that we have a lot of the fields separated. So we could do sort such as last name and first name, and also relationships. We'd also ask that you save the disclosures. We do not want you to scan the disclosures and save multiple disclosures with one PDF file. We do ask that you save one disclosure per file, saved by last name and first name, and this is an example. And again, we would like these forwarded to us on a quarterly basis to begin with. Another thing, form that we do have available is the speaker form, and it addresses these standards. We'd like you to share this form with your speakers. There is an option for them to complete it and send it back. This is not required, though you probably will receive it back. And so if you would just save it, we definitely want to have you send it to physicians that do have relevant relationships. It does just kind of reinforce the guidelines for presentations. Also, a lot of you may have residents that are beginning to make presentations and speaking. It would be good to share these forms with them, and that they may not be familiar with the guidelines for presenting at CME activities. A few things that we've updated. For those that have historically worked with us on RSSs, there is a checklist that you had sent to us on a monthly or quarterly basis. This is no longer required. We do not need to receive this form. We have created an activity checklist, and this is just a little reminder sheet for you to reference, especially if you're new to working with RSS activities. 100% of attendance is automated, so we no longer require the roster for the last few years. If you do need a roster for your individual reporting periods or counts, there is no problem for you maintaining that. We do not need to receive that. We do ask that you share the codes that we are providing you at all activities prior to and following if it's online. Again, all attendance is automated, and it is at the Norton RSS website. We have recently had calls about an app. We used to have an app that we got rid of about 2 to 3 years ago. So Norton Healthcare, we no longer have a CME app. Everything is now located for RSSs at the nortonrss.com site for them to obtain attendance. We will provide a template for you with this, and I know a lot of you already do have the template. We have updated them, and then at the end of this, we will be sending you a link to all the resources that are referenced. This is just a screenshot to show you what happens when an individual goes to claim attendance. They will go to the nortonrss.com, enter their email address and the activity code, and submit it, and they will receive attendance in real time, and they will have the activity credited to their account. A few reminders. A lot of you do not have commercial support, but if by chance you do receive commercial support or a grant from an ineligible company, contact our office. We do need to have a letter of agreement signed with them prior to the event. Additionally, a few things is it is required that the funds of commercial support go to the accredited provider or the joint provider. So those funds need to go to Norton or the joint provider before they're distributed. Also, a supporter cannot pay any expense directly. For example, if you're having an activity at a restaurant, per se, I know a lot, we don't really do that with RSSs, but as an example, if you are having an activity at a restaurant, they cannot pay that restaurant directly for the food. It would need to be paid to Norton or the joint provider, and then the restaurant would be paid. Similar to honorariums, honorariums for speakers should be paid for by Norton or the joint providers. The learners have to be informed of the commercial support prior to the event, and we'll provide a statement at the time if you're going to have one. And also, you cannot indicate commercial support by use of a logo of the supporter. Exhibitors, again, a lot of you do not have exhibits for RSSs, but if by chance, if you do, the exhibit needs to be located in a completely separate place from the activity. So for example, if your activity is at the Wade Mounts Auditorium, you would have your exhibits located out front, or you would have them located in the room next to it with the divider completely shut. If by chance you decide you want to exhibit in the room you're meeting, you do need to have a 30-minute break prior to and following the activity. Budget, we do ask that you send us a budget on an annual basis. Essentially, though, the key things we need is your income. So if you are receiving any commercial support or exhibitor income, if there are expenses affiliated with your activity, please also just send those as well. Again, we only need those numbers on an annual basis. What must be disclosed to learners? ACCME has requirements of a few key things that need to be disclosed to learners prior to the activity. And these have not changed. You need to disclose any planner and speaker relationships, and those are without a relationship. Even if there is not a relationship, this does need to be disclosed, and we will provide a template. If there is a relationship, this does need to be disclosed to learners as well. And with that is the name of the individual, the company they have the relationship with, the type of relationship, and that it was successfully mitigated. So essentially, disclosures have to be relayed to all learners, regardless if there's a relationship or not. And again, a template is provided. Accreditation designation statements are required to be displayed to learners prior to the event and shared with them prior to. We ask that you do not edit the statement. The templates provided do have 1 hour listed, and there are a few activities that are 1.5 hours. And if your time for activity is not an hour, that would be the only thing that we ask you to edit. So please do not edit the statement. Also, a good way to show the statement to learners prior to the event is if you have an email invitation, you can include this statement on that, or a flyer or marketing information. We do ask if you're creating a brochure that you send it to our office for approval, just to make sure the statements are all correct. Commercial support, if you do have commercial support, it is required that you notify learners prior to the event. With that, you're required to do the name of the company, Again, no logos. And then if they are doing an in-kind support, you would indicate what the in-kind support is for. And if it is just financial support, you would just indicate that they had supported the event. Again, we would provide you a template, and here is an example of how we notified learners of commercial support. If your activities are still live stream, one of the things that we do is we call them a pre-talk slideshow, and we'll display the required statements prior to the event as individuals are joining the room, and then we will show them at the end of the event. If your events are in person with the templates we're providing, you can just print those out and leave them at the check-in table with the codes as well. A few of the next steps as we move forward, we ask that you check your listing. If you would go to nortoncme.com, a lot of the activities are listed on here. So we ask that you check and make sure that yours is correct, especially if you were live stream and you're now in person, you're a hybrid, or you're now in person only. If you would please check and make sure that is correct. And if there's any changes needed, just send them to the activity coordinator. For RSS coordinators, we ask in the month of April that you provide documentation of how you're disclosing or letting their learners know about the disclosure status, either with and without relationships to the learners. We also would like for you to complete the disclosure grid. And then we would also like for you to document how you are showing to learners the accreditation designation statements. So essentially for these, we would like for you to show us the slides that you are using in the month of April, and then send those to us the end of April. And what our team will be doing is we'll review the documentation as we receive it. We will provide attendance codes for the remainder of the year. And we'll send you in May an updated application. We have not done applications for RSSs since the 2019, and we just need to update all the information. So we will send you a link to the applications in May. All of the documents and forms that I've referenced in the templates, they are available on our website, and we will send you the link to that website so you can reference those as needed. I also briefly just want to highlight some resources that are available for providers in case you are asked. As I had mentioned, we no longer have the app, so everything is now available at nortoncme.com. When individuals are at this site, all of our live activities are listed where they can register for programs. Also, the RSS activity check-in, that is another way they can get to it. The nortonrss.com is a single click way, and then this would just be a double click way. So the RSS site is easier, but it is another way to get there. But again, all our live activities are listed here. We also have over 200 activities online, and these are available 24/7. Essentially, once the individual finishes watching the video, they would select the evaluation attendance link and then claim their attendance. For individuals on their account, once they log into their account and select my account, they're able to pull transcripts for any time period they enter. They can also, if for some reason they need a certificate, they can print a certificate for a live activity they attended. But all of their information is listed here at their site once they log into the account. Another thing we also do is we have a podcast. and it's called MedChat. And this podcast is available on any podcast app where they regularly listen to podcasts. A new episode is launched each month, and each episode is 30 to 45 minutes. And then once they listen to an episode, they would just go to the show notes, click the link to claim their attendance. We'll skip that slide. And that is the information that I did want to share with everyone. I do want to thank you for joining us. And if you have any questions about CME and the regularly scheduled series, please contact our office by sending an email to cme@nortonhealthcare.org. Thank you.